Welcome to the Copilot Connection.
We're here to share with you all the news, insights, and capabilities of the Microsoft Copilot ecosystem across the entire Microsoft stack. I'm Zoe Wilson, and I'm an executive at Avanade in our modern work business, an MVP for Microsoft 365, a regional director, and a Viva Explorer.
And I'm Kevin McDonald. I'm Microsoft MVP, Viva Explorer, and Copilot Strategy and Modern Workplace AI lead at Avanade. And we'll be releasing episodes as podcasts and on YouTube with insights from experts, from the community, and from Microsoft on all the different areas of Copilots, the impact they can make to you and your organization, what you need to do to prepare for them or to start implementing now, and even, as we covered in the last episode, how you can extend them.
It was really interesting as well, I think, Kevin, looking at the stats for the last episode, it's obvious that there are lots of people out there who are really interested in extensibility for the Copilot ecosystem.
Yeah, that was really good to see, because if I'm honest, I wasn't as happy with the episode as I would have liked. I do prefer it when there's two of us to bounce ideas off and things like that, but the interest in it and the stats are looking very good. So do give that a listen if you haven't had a chance yet. And any questions, contact us on social. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of, really.
Yeah, and if you're already extending Copilot, any of the Copilots, we'd really love to hear from you. We'd love to know what your experience is like, what kind of thing you're doing. So maybe we can get you on a future episode.
Absolutely, because we're doing so well at organising those extra people. I was determined last week to book some of those and failed miserably, but we'll get there.
So this week, we're going to be reviewing some of the latest Copilot news, as always, but we're also going to look at some of the myths that we see being shared about Copilots.
Yeah, and I think with some of those news, we're going to put some links into the show notes that we haven't really got time to cover in here, but we think are of interest. So you won't miss out on some of those as well. So some really, especially Work Labs, had some really good articles out there. But we would talk for hours, and we probably could, to be honest, Zoe, if we covered those.
Yeah, I think we've said this before, but there's generally so much news coming out on a regular basis around Copilot and generative AI that we could literally do 2-hour episodes. So we've picked some of the most relevant ones for you, and like Kevin said, we'll include some of the links. So definitely do check out the show notes as well as listening.
Yeah, absolutely. But first bit of news, and I like this because it involves licensing, which is always something that many people duck away from, but I don't think we should. So let's see, we'll make that a little bit louder, wider for those watching on there. This one, and I need to look at this article because it catches my surprise, but this is all about fabric pricing. So they announced that the fabric pricing will kick in from March the 1st. We've been in public preview for Copilot in Fabric on there, and they've now talked about how the billing's going to kick in from March the 1st. And it's definitely worth a read, but it's a little bit more complex. And I certainly would like, I think I mentioned as I put this out on social media, I would like to go and talk to someone a bit more about this, because I want to understand how exactly it works. Because ultimately it's about the number of tokens, and it comes up with something called a consumption rate. Now, I've worked with Cosmos DB a bit before, and it's a similar thing where you kind of use a consumption and it almost caps it out to a certain level and slows things down if you're using things there, and you kind of get a consistent rate over time. But it means it's probably not the easiest thing for people to calculate if they haven't been looking at this before. But you effectively get charged on the amounts you use on the input. So how big your prompt is, how much your question is going into the Copilot, and then how much comes out you get charged on as well. Interesting, you get charged more on that. You get charged less because your consumption rate is higher within there. So it's effectively you pay for the almost like your bandwidth. If you imagine you're paying for the bandwidth on the internet, is the way I understand it, you're paying for your bandwidth for things you can get through, and it will just take a lot longer if you're using too much. And there's ways it's got in there. interestingly, as apps, as Power BI apps, that you've got ways to look at how your usage is going over time as well. Zoe's gone very quiet, which makes me think this isn't something she's looked at previously. this model as well, but
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? So I was actually just thinking we should maybe have a licensing focused episode where we go through the licensing for all of the different parts of the Copilot ecosystem.
yeah, maybe that could be a solo one for you, Zoe.
Are you not interested in licensing, Kevin?
No, I am. I was debating talking about this. One of the things I'd like to do is to kind of have a summary for each of the co-pilots, and one of the things is to look at the licensing. And I have been looking at some of that, and yeah, it's not a simple one. So it might be a series that we put together for that one, but I think it would be useful, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think for people who are going to be using this, understanding things like the fabric throttling policy, how it smooths that usage over time will be really important, because people will need to factor this into the things that they're building and the things that they're doing inside of that fabric workspace.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing from this article, it talks about the region mapping, because obviously a lot of the OpenAI services are only available in certain regions, in certain locations. So you can enable that cross-geo process tenant settings in there, but then there can be slightly different pricing depending on the region you're in. So it is definitely worth looking at this and making sure you consider how you're going to use this on there. I'm sure we'll see some interesting articles come out on that as well.
Yeah, so that's interesting about the region mapping, because I was actually, and I'm going off tangent a little bit here, but I was looking at the M365 roadmap, and one of the things that's in the roadmap to come out in the next couple of months is Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 data residency commitments, where
that's easy for you to say.
What it says is they'll have new commitments covering stored content of interactions with Copilot for M365, which will be added to existing data residency commitments. So what I think that means is that over the course of the next few months, we'll start to see more focus on some of those, the geolocation of where things happen and where things are stored to comply with data residency and data boundaries.
Yeah, I think that would be really good, because I know they've been very clear that Copilot won't breach the European data boundary, but beyond that, it's a little more flexible, isn't it, in terms of what they talk about?
Yeah, and it's interesting for a lot of the highly regulated or government industries in the UK, for example, because we're not UK, we're not EU anymore. So we're not governed by that EU data boundary. And I know that there are lots of conversations around where the data will flow for those who are in highly regulated or government industries.
Yeah, absolutely. For those watching on video, notice I got a bit distracted because you mentioned the roadmap there. Another article we forgot to include was from our good friend Sarah Fenner, who did a bit of analysis of the roadmap items since November 2023. I'm just going to flash that up on screen within there. And the reason I think this is interesting to this podcast is that 1%. So with all the talk about how big Copilot is, only 1% of the roadmap items have involved Copilot, compared with 12% for Viva, which apparently everyone thinks is dead. So I thought that was really fascinating to kind of take that breakdown. And I'm sure, there's a lot more behind the scenes and a lot more chat, and things like SharePoint and Teams will have OneDrive elements in there. But I thought it was really fascinating.
That's really interesting, because I know that on the roadmap there'll be a lot of things that are tagged with Viva and Copilot. So I'm going to ping Sarah after this and see how she's analysed the data for it.
Yeah, no, I think it's intriguing, but maybe we just need more things written on the roadmap for that one.
Right, what's up next, Kevin?
So next one, this is again less Copilots. This is more about OpenAI news, and this one came from CMS Wire, talking about the ChatGPT mentions. And I found this really interesting. Effectively, and I'm probably going to get called out for making this a bit simpler, but GPT mentions allow you to, in the same way that within Teams, Viva Engage, all sorts of things, you can at mention people. Effectively, you'll be able to do that with Chat GPT to different. I'm trying not to say plugins, but effective different GPTs, I think they're calling them within that OpenAI world. So you can mention those items. So you could say like, um, what was the example of that music one? Or you could say maybe Expedia. Hey, Expedia, could you tell me the best price for going to Wiesbaden in May, for example, if you happen to be booking for tickets for the Collab Summit and things on there. So you've got this way to ask and trigger those things. Now, I really like the sound of this because one of the things we'll talk about with the myths is how you get to those plugins. And it'd be really interesting if this became a way to get to the plugins and they kind of change some of the Copilot to make it as easy as this. And it kind of fits in that M365 model and other areas of Microsoft to be able to kind of mention things. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. Really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when they announced the custom GPTs, they gave examples of things like fitness GPTs or menu finders. So being able to ask, like app mention the fitness GPT for a new training plan before you go in the gym, or you're about to start planning cooking your evening meal and you app mention a recipe finder or something like that with the ingredients that you've got in the fridge and ask it to give you a recipe.
I'm smirking slightly because I love the fact I talked about travel and music as my GPTs, and you talked about being healthy and food plans on there. It says a lot about us.
I don't know. If you look
so
at my travel plan, I think Expedia is one I could find quite useful as well.
That's true. So the next one, and this has caused a lot of social media buzz. So probably you've seen this, but OpenAI announced Sora. So this is something that isn't available yet. It's kind of an early announcement, and they've got the technical report. But it's that ability to take a text prompt and to move this over to generating videos. Now, there have been other services like this. There's a guy, what's his name on Twitter, Robert Scoble, who retweets a lot of these, and there's been some nice examples. There's been some really horrific, terrible ones. But I think it's the quality of the videos that we're seeing from Sora that's impressing and scaring people at the same time. They're not perfect. I know, Zoe, this video we're looking at of a Chinese lady walking, or possibly Korean lady walking through the streets. You kind of notice her hands there is a little bit freaky. The kind of length of fingers and gap there doesn't quite work, and there's kind of a glow around her as well. But generally, the quality of these is really quite impressive. Bearing in mind, these are ones. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, especially considering this is one prompt.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got the prompt down the bottom. A stylish woman walks down a Tokyo street filled with warm, glowing neon and animated city signage. She wears a black leather jacket, long red dress, and black boots, and carries a black purse. There's a few more lines in there to describe that. But it's got things like the reflection in the glasses shows up correctly. There's another one. There's a video further down, which I'll show in a sec. But there's another one I've seen of someone walking through an art gallery. And some of the tweets I saw mentioned that often when you have that, there's actually the pictures behind change as people walk past that, whereas with Sora it doesn't. And I also love this page because they highlight some of the things where it goes wrong. So we got here on the screen a man running on a treadmill. But even for someone who doesn't use treadmills very much, I know that you don't run backwards on a treadmill on there. It's confused the left and right on that in a highly entertaining way. And another example of a dog jumping between there who somehow seems to manage to walk through a door while at the same time being in front of it. So it hasn't necessarily got the physics.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, I don't have dogs, but I do have cats, and I know if one of my cats tried to walk from that windowsill to the next, it'd be on the floor.
Yes. Yeah. So but again, it's kind of like cartoons in a way within there. I know in cartoons, it doesn't seem quite physically possible, but this is like a real world cartoon almost. So
Yeah.
there's definitely still work to be done, but it's incredible to see.
Yeah, and you were right that this has generated a lot of noise. I think there are a lot of people who work in the creative industry who are worried about what this means for their jobs. There are people demanding to know what data Sora was trained on. I've seen quite a lot of people saying they think it must have been trained on things like the Unreal Engine or other video games. And when when you look at the partnership with Microsoft and Microsoft's gaming division and Minecraft and things like that, it's not unfeasible that OpenAI would have had a lot of access to that content. But there's also tons of stuff just available on YouTube and the broader internet that it's likely to have been trained on as well.
Yeah. So I think we talked about at our sort of start of year show that kind of content and data ownership will be one of the top topics of this year. I can only see videos raising that and increasing that further as well. And I imagine that's also why they haven't put this available out to people, as well as not quite being ready for general consumption. I think there's a lot of that to looked at and work through. But yeah, fascinating. And why are we talking about that in Copilot Connection? Well, I'm sure we will see these models start together. One of the things that I've included in the newsletter is as opposed to about 3 trends, and it's that multimodal. So that ability to generate videos, I'm sure will be coming, whether it's the Copilot Pro, whether it's the Copilot for Microsoft 365 and loading things straight to stream, who knows? But I think we'll see this come sooner rather than later as well.
Yeah, completely agree.
Right. Shall we get onto some of our myths and become mythbusters? Which I really should have thought about because it's really hard to say on there. But I think it's probably time for us to go through and to try and bust some myths and actually say, well, actually, some of them are kind of true as well.
Yeah, let's. And it's been an interesting few months, hasn't it? Because we've had access to Copilot for M365 for a while. You've got things like Microsoft Copilot, the artist formerly known as Bing, which everybody has access to. And it's only really over the last few weeks that outside of the early access program, people have been able to get wider access to Copilot, particularly when Microsoft dropped the licensing restrictions. And for some of those broader Copilot products, other than M365, as they've moved through the preview cycle and started to become more widely available, what this means is that lots more people are getting their hands on it, which means that some of these myths are starting to perpetuate and become more widely believed, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think also that people are trying one thing and saying, oh, we're seeing this is the case, whereas it's not always on there, which I think probably takes off. And partly what triggered me thinking about this was the first myth, and I'm just trying to find the link that's triggered this off, which I'll show in a sec. But this was the fact that Copilot is trained on your own data. Now, this for me came from Daniel Anderson having this great post, which I really like. But he said, use this prompt to train Copilot to emulate your tone of voice. And I went, you don't train Copilot. And I think this is true. This is the myth on there, that the content you're putting in, and we're talking here about Copilot for Microsoft 365, the kind of paid for Copilot. So we're excluding the artist formerly known as well, I guess the artist formerly known as Bing Chat. So if you've got any of your paid, your corporate enterprise level ones, Microsoft will not be using your prompts, your information to train the large language models for the future. So content you put in there won't be reused. If you're using this as in Bing with your personal accounts and you don't have Copilot Pro and you haven't set it up with your enterprise data, then it will be using your prompts. It will learn from those and use that to train and improve the engine over time within there. But anything enterprise grade, No.
Yeah, but there's a really important but there, because if you're using personal Bing, not the enterprise protected Bing, and you're putting in prompts and data and things like that, the things that you enter may be used to train the model, but it's not going to train it specifically for you and the way you use it. So if I put prompts in, it's not going to suddenly give me a better experience that's more tailored to me. It's going to generally improve the ability of this model for everybody. So it still won't pick up your tone of voice just from what you put in it.
Yeah, absolutely true. So to defend Daniel Anderson, what he actually talks about in there is to put a prompt that kind of describes who you are, what you're trying to achieve, post that, and then follow up with more questions, which will use that previous prompt in your tone of voice. So it's about putting your tone of voice in there. That is absolutely true and a really powerful way to get in there. So great article, but also triggered me thinking about those initial myths that people have had.
Yeah, and it is, you're right, it is one that I do see perpetuated. Another one that we come across quite a lot is that Copilot just works. You just turn it on. You don't really need to do anything to get the value out of it. It just works. And this one it's kind of true, because technically there's not a huge amount of heavy lifting to actually get this enabled. But for people to actually get the most value out of this, for them to be able to build that Copilot muscle and to understand things like prompting and how to provide context around tone of voice and who the audience is or anything like that, you know, that takes time. And it's not like you can give this to people and then on day one they'll understand exactly how to get the best out of the tool. It's a journey that people need to go on, and they'll need support and change enablement and training and all of that to help them build that muscle over time.
And I think also about making sure your content, your data, your systems are in a good place to work with Copilot, whether that's Copilot for Microsoft 365, that you've got your data in there, that you're not oversharing, you're not undersharing, you've put things into useful areas that make sense. You haven't called it v1.7.ab. Is this the final draft? Question mark. I did find a file actually internally, not far off that, which I probably shouldn't talk about, but making sure that you have those, that you used metadata where you can to help Copilot find things on there. Or even if we're looking at things like dynamics, if you've added a lot of customizations, then Copilot, it has kind of been, I don't know if you'd use the word trained, but designed to work with an anticipation of how things are. And if you've gone away from that, then it might be a little bit harder to get the information out that you need from there as well. So I'm trying to not use that word I've put in the notes. That's a little bit rude there, Zoe. So any kids listening are okay. But if you've corrupted your instance in some way and put a lot of development, made a lot of changes, then Copilot's going to find it harder to work with that data as well.
Yeah, and I know we've kind of gone a little bit out of order in terms of actually naming the myths, but for me, one of the myths that I come across quite regularly is people thinking that this is one size fits all. So what we mean by that is people think that, and this is true for multiple different types of Copilot, people think that, you know, organizations will use it in the same way, or everybody in finance will use it in the same way, or everybody you know, everybody like is an individual will get the same type of value out of it. And it's just not true, because when we think about what Copilot is, and again, this is any Copilot, when we think about what it is capability that we can use to augment the way that we work. And the way that we each work is very different. It's individual to us. It is something that we've built up and developed over time. You know, the way I manage my email, my meetings, the way I create, collaborate, communicate, all of those things is going to be different from how you do it, Kevin. So what that means is there might be something that's really cool that Copilot can do, whether it's Sales Copilot or Copilot in Beaver or, you know, Copilot in Teams, whatever it might be, but actually it might not be relevant.
Sorry. What's this sales Copilot you talk of? Is that Copilot in sales? Copilot for sales?
I'm referring to the add-ins in Outlook and Teams.
We do love naming.
But yeah, so you know, even where you've got 5 people that might do the same job in finance, and you might have a really powerful finance use case, whether it's for Copilot in D365 finance, whether it's M365, it might not be relevant to all of them because it might not actually add value to the way that they work.
Yeah, and the same in the M365 ones. I don't use the one in Excel much. It doesn't fit to the way I work. It requires you to need tables, and most of my content isn't in tables within there. So I don't find the value quite so much with that one. So yeah, I absolutely agree. There's going to be different ways, and I think allowing people to experiment and find the ones is one of the key areas that does see a benefit. And I think that moves us on to the next myth. And this could be a controversial one, but one of the myths is that Copilot will save money. Now, I imagine at least half of you are going, oh, $30 per user per month, that's not going to save money. But we're seeing a lot of people do calculations, and, you know, if it's saving an hour a day, which it often and very easily can do, and it's been demonstrated to, then it can be seen as a money saver within there. But I think it's fair to say, Zoe, that even with that, it's not as simple a story.
Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, that's distilling an ROI calculation down to a really simplified level, which is if an employee salary is X dollars or pounds per year, then, you know, they need to save X many hours per week or per month to break even. But from a CFO perspective, that's not going to wash, because if you add $30 per user per month for some or all of your organization, what you've done is essentially added a whopping great big cost onto the P&L. And individuals saving hours per week, per day, or per week, or per month isn't going to do anything to balance that. So it's not so much about how many hours people save, it's about what they do with that time. And are there ways that they can use that time to drive efficiencies, reduce cost of sale or time to value, find ways to innovate and go after new markets, or you know, increase top line revenue. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it. But yeah, for people who think, you know, people who think it's going to save time, which means we can reduce headcounts and then drive costs that way, that's another way of looking at it that I don't like either. Because for me, I think that's a huge oversimplification, and you know, assuming that Copilot on day one is going to lead to a 20% headcount reduction is just really rubbish and horrible.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that one. So next myth. Copilot is collecting all your data from Office apps, and this one actually came up on Twitter. I saw. Let's bring it up. So this was from Andrew Terry, CPA. I saw it shared by Ashley, the CPA, who's been fantastic, talking about Twitter and the legal side on there. And it said that, is Microsoft really collecting data from all Office apps? Well, yeah, it is. I mean, the Microsoft Graph has been around for a long time. Things you do within Microsoft 365 are collected within audit logs. They're tracking what's happening within there. That powers the Microsoft Graph, which gives you connections in search, gives you recommended documents. And Copilot uses that with the large language model to ground your data. So yes, what you're doing within Graph is available, and Copilot will use that to make those recommendations, to make those connections with there. Does it attribute that directly to you? Is this ways for companies to snoop on you and be able to kind of say you're not doing enough work, or you're doing too much work, they're never going to accuse you of that. But if you're doing the wrong sorts of work within there, Copilot will not do that. It will not give you that ability to see what lots of other people are doing and say who's doing more, who's doing less within there. And I think we've seen a few people looking at that. How can I see that connections with people? How can I see what they're doing within there? It will obey your permission. So you'll only see what you give permissions to see within there. But if you're going down to the full myth, yes, Microsoft is capturing everything that's happening, and your organization has permissions to see that.
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, when people are using corporate systems, they should have no expectation to privacy. I think it's been common for many years now, and I'm sure I've had to do this in at least the last 3 or 4 employers, where part of your employment contract basically says that you recognize this. So if you're using work systems, then everything is auditable. Things like network access on your device, the locations that you're logging in from. So it's no surprise, and it's something that Delve has been surfacing for years. And then Viva as well, all of the stuff in Viva Insights, where it's building your network of collaborators and where it's recommending tasks that you've forgotten and things that you've missed. All of that is coming from the same data source that Copilot is also utilizing.
Yeah. But I think a lot of what Copilot does is not to surface that information to people to kind of say, I want to know the amount of work that Zoe's doing. I want to know the amount of work that Kevin's doing. Copilot's not going to make it easier to do that. The graph is already got certain elements of that, but it's impressively hard to get the information out from that. And that continues with Copilot as well. So yes, it is true. It's collecting your data, but false that it's making that more available as well.
Yeah. Okay. So next myth, that Copilot that Copilot requires or will reduce the need for human involvement. What's your take on this one?
Well, it's obviously false for this. It's called Copilot, not autopilots within there. I'm sure many of you have heard that phrase a lot, but it's true that Copilot is there to see that, to be your kind of buddy that sits next to you, that helps you get things done within there. It helps you be more productive. It gives you ideas to be more innovative, but it's not going to replace things within there automatically. It's not going to do everything you do. It's going to help you do things quicker within there.
Yeah. And so the human in the loop is
drain the slide. I'm not going to drain the slide on that one.
Did you have to? Yeah, so the human in the loop is absolutely key. And if we give a few different examples, Copilot in security, Copilot for security. I'm not sure what we're calling that one these days. Security Copilot. Imagine there's a security analyst who is using Copilot to understand some of the threat signals within an organization, and they need to take action. You need that human in the loop to make sure that the action that's being taken is the right one, I think.
Yeah. And I think we see that a lot with, and some people complain about this, that Copilot doesn't take actions. It just gives you information to do that on there. And I don't think we'll see that massively change anytime soon as well. So the next one, everyone is excited about Copilot. What do you think,
Zoe? So this one's false. It almost feels like there's been a bit of a change in tide recently, and the last Gartner hype cycle that was published a little while back had generative AI right at the top of the hype cycle, which means that we're about to go into, or we're heading down to the trough of disillusionment. And I've seen a few articles recently, I think you've sent me some of the links to, Kevin, where people are starting to talk about buyer's remorse for Copilot for M365, or people are sharing that they've been underwhelmed. And I think this is perfectly normal. For all of these Copilot products, there's a huge amount of expectation, and because of the scarcity of access for quite a while, And also the fact that this was a preview, well, these were preview products and essentially still being built and still maturing. It feels to me like there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of expectations. And based on everything I've seen in my experience, I think as the product continues to mature, as people's understanding of it continues to mature, and people start to fully understand what the art of the possible is and what that extensibility pathway and strategy looks like, we'll see people come outside of the other side of this trough of disillusionment. I can't hear you, Kevin. So Kevin's having some technical difficulties. I'm going to move on to the next myth while he tries to sort out his microphone. So the next myth that we've seen with Copilot is the myth that Copilot will automate everything. And again, this is one that is just not true. Copilot will make it possible to, with plugins, with extensibility, with things like Copilot Studio. It will become easier to automate. It will be easier to bring things into the flow of work with those Copilot plugins. But again, that still requires a human to actually do something. It still requires us to look at what that process is, and it will still require us to actually put the prompts in and to to think about what some of those process steps are. Okay, so now I've lost Kevin altogether. I'm just going to keep going. So another myth that we've got is that Copilot can solve everything. Again, this is another one that is just not true. There are certain things that the different Copilot products will be really good at. There are definitely ways that Copilot can provide different types of value, but Copilot will not solve for everything.
What about a refresh? Will that solve everything?
It looks like it's worked for you, Kevin.
Excellent. Don't know what happened.
Brilliant.
There. That wasn't me for once. Just decided to stop working.
So the two myths left. Do you want to talk about the Copilot plugins?
Yeah, so this one was around you can't do anything about Copilot choosing the right plugin. So this is I talked about extensions and extensibility and plugins in the last episode. And one of the challenges that we have seen for that is how do you kind of ask a question and see it routes through to the right thing? I've kind of put in the notes false. And the reason for that is this link that I'll bring up onto this screen any second now, as I've realized that stopped sharing. But there is now capability to effectively debug how you select the plugin, so you can see from what you're asking it how it gets through there. I think it is fair to say from those who've been building plugins, there is a bit of a challenge to get through this. You often get to a point where there's a very specific phrase that you can get that gets that plugin really nicely. If you deviate from that, then sometimes it doesn't work so well. So I know that there is some work going on with this, and that's why I love having this debugging plugins available within there, so you can help to understand it as well. So I guess a kind of true myth with this one, but with this link, which we'll put in the show notes, you can put developer mode on, and it will give you a lot more information as to how things are getting within there. So a nice change on that one. But that brings us to two more we've got here. One, that Copilot keeps changing how it works. Well, that's kind of true, isn't it, really, Zoe?
It is true. It is true, and this is an evolving product which will continue to mature and iterate over time. So I think we will continue to see this happening.
I mean, a great example. We've seen the new Microsoft Copilot experience in Teams, as they've said here. What was M365 chat now renamed as just Copilot. Within there, you're seeing where that comes in, be different. That ability to create a new chat so you can get that fresh one for anyone who happens to be demoing Copilot in a live environment. This is fantastic. Big fan of this. I think it's a good new change. But again, these are the kind of changes that we're seeing happening. We're seeing that the way it goes through is very different as well. So yes, it is changing. Yes, we'll see a lot more from that. But then the final myth, Zoe, Copilot can solve everything.
It's all right. I did this one while you were refreshing your browser.
So he can't solve that one himself. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And you said it's true, right?
I did say that. That was. Did I say?
No.
Your language just confused me. Yeah. So no, Copilot cannot solve everything.
No, absolutely not. So I think that's probably just about time to wrap up. I wanted to highlight a few events coming up this Wednesday. So what's that? 21st of February. There's Teams Nation. We've got the MVP Summit coming up in, gosh, what's that? 2 weeks, 3 weeks time.
3 weeks
now, which is terrifying.
Is it 3 weeks
so
or is it 3 weeks? Yeah, it's 3 weeks,
yes.
isn't it?
Yes, I have to think about that. We'll ask Copilot in a minute. But we will be looking to interview lots of Microsoft folks over there. So we will get a lot of those discussions we're hoping to have from that. Also sign up for the Collab Summit. Zoe and I will both be there. There's going to be a lot of Copilots happening at that event. We have Commsverse, which is just had its call for speakers closed. So we should see some amazing events coming up for that. And also the M365 Summit, which I think start of May off the top of my head. So have a look at those events. I'll put the links to those into the show notes and get out there and see what Copilot can bring to you.
Yeah, and for anybody who's in the UK or travels to the UK for events, the call for speakers for Scottish Summit will be opening soon as well. So if you've got a Copilot story that you want to tell and you'd like a friendly crowd, then Scottish Summit definitely the place to be.
I don't know, some of those other MVPs aren't very Copilot friendly, but apart from that, yeah, they're lovely people.
Yeah, we should have talked about the old men yelling at clouds session at Tallinn. That looked like a lot of fun. I think that was just a bunch of old men yelling about Copilot, really, wasn't it? From everything I saw.
I suspect true, knowing that lot.
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. We've got more big things planned for future episodes. Like Kevin said, we'll be getting lots of interviews while we're in Seattle for MVP Summit, both with MVPs and people from Microsoft. And then we'll be back once we're back from Seattle with lots more news and developments for you.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear more, then please subscribe. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, /X. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to YouTube. Tell your colleagues. Tell your clients. Tell your friends. In fact, Zoe, I believe you had a client say to you in a meeting the other day how much they enjoyed the podcast. So please tell people it is making a lovely difference and gives us a big smile when we hear that. Let us know what you want to hear. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for listening and look forward to talking again soon.
And I just need to find the icon and hit play. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.